Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark for the next episode of Wuxia Workshop. And today we're going to be talking about One-Armed Swordsman and Five Elements Ninja. But first, you have a new game, I think it's called Lone Wolf Fist, that you wanted to talk about. So why don't we talk about that first, and then we'll get into the movies.
Yeah, sure. I just want to do a really quick plug for it. I got a fire alarm to me a couple of weeks ago. I was on a gaming site, and they were like, "Hey, that game looks cool." When I was talking about it, which is unique for me, and I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna finish it in 2 weeks. It's mostly done." It wasn't. It wasn't mostly done, Brendan. That was a lie. So 2 solid weeks, I cranked out like 100 pages worth of content and game system, and I added a bunch of the rules from Tiansheng to it, and I made what I call the I Bleed playtest, which is the playtest before it's a real playtest. It's actually on DriveThru RPG. If you want to grab it, it is free because it's ugly and it will hurt your eyes and the writing is terrible. But a lot of the system's in there and it's great. So go do that.
Now, can you explain what system it's for, what it what project it's a part of, or if it's an independent thing?
Well, yeah, it's for Tiansheng. It shares a lot of the DNA with that system. It's kind of like a lower tiered version of that. Kind of like, I don't know if anyone's an Exalted fan who watches this, considering how much I loathe that game now. But like, it's kind of like playing Mortals and Exalted, where like there are guys that are way cooler than you, and you're the guys that are in the dirt and the fire and the atomic waste.
Okay.
It's post-apocalyptic. That's the vibe of it. So it's kind of like playing a Fist of the North Star game, which is its big appeal. And yeah, it's a Tiansheng game, so if you want to check that system out 4 or 5 months early, then this is a good way to do it.
All right, yeah, and you said it's pay what you want, right? It's pay.
Some people have actually paid me for it, which startled me. So I'm like, "You're paying for this? I'm sorry." But I'm gonna take that money, tip it into the Five Emperors bucket, which is the group I have that is making Tiansheng. I'm just gonna use that specifically for this project to like buy art. I've already talked to an artist. Play a PR layout, gotta do layout, probably pay the technical editor I'm talking to, stuff like that.
Now, why is it called Lone Wolf Fist?
Because I was sleep deprived and I had to think of a name in like 30 seconds, and I'm like, you know what, Lone Wolf is cool, and they punch fists.
Okay, all right. Fists. I'm gonna check it out. I haven't had a chance to
it.
check it out yet, but that's gonna be at the top of my list after the program.
Good man.
Yeah, I did something like that too. Like I like the idea of doing sort of like more mundane type characters in a world where there are more powerful people than you. And that's when I did Strange Tales. That's how I approached it, and I think it can work really well. Like if you sort of come up with a lower tier of power for a game, and let people play the grubbier characters for a little while, and see what it's like to be on the bottom. It can work for certain things. But what we should do too? I have since you kind of did a last minute adventure thing, and I have an adventure idea in my head. At the end of this, if we have time, I wanna hash out an adventure concept with you and see what you think.
Ooh, yes, absolutely. More sleep-deprived adventure writing, folks. You heard it here first.
So before we get into gaming stuff, I made you watch Five Elements Ninja and One-Armed Swordsman, and so they're both Cheng Che movies. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you did. I lost some sleep for those movies. Worth it. These are really good.
So they're both Cheng Che films, but one of them, One-Armed Swordsman, is from 1967, so it's a very early kind of classic Shaw Brothers film. And Five Element Ninja is like 1982, so it's like an early 80s, sort of this period in Shaw Brothers where everything is getting a lot more experimental, chaotic, unpredictable, and it's interesting to see the range. But what was your initial response to them?
I liked these. I liked both of them, and I watched them in the order you suggested, which is One-Armed Swordsman first, and then Five Element Ninja second. And you're right, when it comes to One-Armed Swordsman, that is almost the archetypical wuxia movie. It's got a really solid 3-act structure. It follows the main character, and like all the stuff you'd expect to happen. Like his father dies in the first scene. He loses his arm, and he's training. It's like beat for beat exactly what you expect, and I loved it. Like, even though it's predictable, it's really good, and it's suspenseful to the last minute, which is a trademark Shaw Brothers thing. That might just be a wuxia thing in general, but like I know, like every time I watch a Shaw Brothers movie, until the last 3 minutes, you don't know how it's going to end.
Yeah, no, that's true.
That's my impression of that. And then Five Elements Ninja happened, and I'm like, it's like a comic book exploded. I love it. So it's a little zanier. But that's my weakness. I like that gonzo stuff. So you got like ninjas that all have elemental themes, and you got like little blue ninjas paddling around their little inflatable ducks with blow darts. And I'm like, yeah, that's my jam. Five Elements Ninja. So much more zany, although almost the same movie in a lot of ways. I think we'll get to that later. But I loved them both. I really enjoyed One Armed Swordsman. And then I'm never going to stop rewatching Five Elements Ninja. That was just glorious.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, because One Armed Swordsman is, number one, it's more of a classic love story almost. Like there's a romantic section in it. It's a lot more slower paced, I would say, than Five Elements Ninja. Five Elements Ninja, people are getting ripped apart all the time. There's a femme fatale that's a lot more revealing. That there's a kind of femme fatale character in One Armed Swordsman, the woman who cuts off his arm, but she's still like a reputable swordswoman. She's not at all.
I saw her as kind of a brat myself, so.
Yeah, well, you know what that is? It's all based on the Return to Condor Heroes story. It's like he took one little section from the middle of the story and he turned it into the movie, and then he changed a bunch of stuff. So like the character in Return to Condor Heroes is Yangua, and the woman who cuts off his arm is Guafu, who's the daughter of a big hero in the story. And it's kind of a similar thing. There's even like in the story, there's even these two guys named the Wu brothers who were sort of those two characters at the start of the film that are making fun of him. But the situation is quite different. So the specifics are different, but the general things are still there. But yeah, and so in the original source material, the main character who gets his arm cut off. The woman who cuts off his arm is similar to her. She's kind of bratty and just incapable of seeing how she's wronged people, even after cutting off their arm.
That made her a very appealing character for me. I think that might be one of my favorite character archetypes, is really vain and blind how bad they are, because that's me, baby.
Well,
so I was like, I like you, lady.
Well, she's one of these characters that you're sort of supposed to enjoy disliking her. She's that kind of character. But I thought that the woman in Five Elements Ninja was a little more interesting. What was her name? San Shi, I think was her name.
Yes, I liked her quite a bit, actually. My favorite. There's a lot of good scenes with her. I think that's the thing that's appealing about her to me, is that like every time she's in a scene, she's like, "Hey, yo, this is my scene." Yeah. So like, she's got a real presence in the movie. And she's definitely there to be noticed. Like they put her in this like what is a mesh body stocking thing, and she's really scantily clad, and she's good looking. So like you notice her when she's in a scene, and like she has a lot of different roles in the movie. She's like she's a ninja, so she goes and is disguised as like this demure young lady that like tries to help out while she's secretly poisoning and trapping everything. And like she's really fascinating. And like my favorite scene with her, unfortunately, is right after she bites it, and the guy who kills her is like, "Ha! I was right about your trap." Oh shit, was I right? Oh god.
Yeah, no, that's the interesting.
Where it's like, uh-oh.
So the interesting thing about that scene is, number one, that even happens. That the hero just kind of just kills this woman like this, and then he has his doubts after, and I don't know. It's sort of like an unexpected moment, because I was not when I first saw this film, I was not expecting that to happen. I was expecting, maybe she'll die, but it'll be because the ninjas kill her. He's
that's what you'd expect. But yeah, no, he kills her. Then he's like, "I'm smart. You can't trick me." And then he kills her ninja friends, and he's like, "I was right." And then he has this moment down, and he's like, "Holy shit, maybe I'm not right. Anyway, I gotta go."
Yeah, and he wasn't right. He was wrong. He was completely wrong. Now, I don't think that they would have ended up a couple, obviously, because she killed one of his sect brothers. But
she kept trying to put 6 months of hard labor over "I killed your master and your clan."
Yeah, no, it's
like, man, you're really a psycho, huh?
Yeah, you can't. The things she did were pretty unforgivable. But usually in a movie like this, the hero is not going to kill that character. Do you know what I mean? That was sort of the thing that was surprising.
I didn't know he was the hero. Because halfway through the movie, I'm still thinking Fist Guy is the hero. Nope, he's toast. And then it flashes, I was like, because he dies, and the Master's in the building, it's burning, he's choking to death, and then he dies, and I'm like, isn't that everybody? Where's this movie going? This is only halfway done. And then it flashes that guy, and I'm like, oh, he's the main character? Holy God! Then it comes out, he's a ninja, and it's like, oh, alright, well, let's keep going.
It's one of these things where, there is sort of, there's always been this, like, debate, especially around stuff like Oriental Adventures and stuff like that, like, how much Japanese stuff do you have in a Wuxia campaign? And obviously Japan's there. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is a Japan. So, like, you read Wuxia novels, Japanese characters will make their way into the stories. And this obviously is probably riding the ninja craze a little bit because it was early 80s. But
I immediately was like 80s ninja craze. Yep.
But there are movies where they have ninja like this in the in the stories. Just they come from Japan. They're not generally from the area. But
I did note that later on when he's getting ninja training, the guy is like, "Oh yeah, China started this out. It's better in Japan, but started."
But that's always, even like, if you like ever take a martial art, like, that's always the thing people say. Oh, it was originally our idea. That's a pretty common thing to hear. It's like, well, one of our people punched one of your people 1,000 years ago, so we really launched your martial arts lineages.
Japanese guys clucking their tongues, shaking their heads, like, oh, come on, guys, seriously. It's like saying the Romans did America.
I wish I had the book right on hand because I can't remember the title off the top of my head. But there's a history book by a historian who's also a martial artist who wrote like a history of Asian martial arts with the intent of kind of debunking some of the myths about them and challenging some of the origin stories. It's kind of an interesting read. But again, we're in the realm of romantic fantasy here, so like
and a thing that actually really impressed me about this movie is that it started out with a super noble Japanese guy being a super badass and honorably killing himself with seppuku. Because I was like, okay, it's called ninjas, and there are ninjas in it. So they're from Japan even, and it's a Chinese movie. This is going to be racist as hell. Not really. Like, not appreciably. Yeah, it starts off with really... The Japanese in the movie are portrayed as noble, and they're portrayed as cunning and capable whole time. So, like, there's not a whole lot of, like, really nasty racist stuff, which surprised me. Because, like, talk about, like, there's some significant racial tension between China and Japan after World War II, so...
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot of history there. I think that you see it a lot in the kung fu craze movies with the Japanese schools. That's where you really will see a lot of sort of the heavy-handed racial stuff. But again, there's like a real history there too. So it's sort of it's easy to understand if you understand what's going on.
Yeah, no, I'm not blaming anyone for any attitudes they have. I'm just saying that, like, that's what I was going and expecting. I was like, they're legit doing, like, this like a Japanese clan coming in. Yeah. And there's a little bit of we did it first, and there's a little bit of the bad guys use trickery because they're the Japanese, and like that. Okay, but like it's not like an oppressive racist overtone.
No.
And I'm going to compare it to something that hit me in the face with racism a couple of years ago. Did you ever see a movie called Babes on Broadway? I know this is a weird diversion.
No, I never seen it.
It's an Andy Rooney vehicle, all right? This is back when Andy Rooney was tap dancing, so this is like in the 40s. It's black and white. And like it's about kids who go and hang out on that a boulevard in Broadway trying to get in a show. Like, that's it. That's the movie. That's why it's called Babes on Broadway. They're all kids hanging out. They're good at dancing. All right, so the arc of the movie is we're going to put on a show. And in the end, they put on a show. And the show is, like, in the middle of it, they're, like, doing their little dance about what kind of show are we going to put on? And then it's like, let's do a blackface show.
Oh, I got you.
Like, wait, what? And then it just opens up, the curtains open, I'm not kidding you, and everyone's in blackface. It's this huge line. And it's just like this racist nightmare for the next 10 minutes. And I mean, like, they lay it on thick. It is horrible. You got people eating watermelon. You've got, like, everything you would expect to see in a minstrel show. And I'm just like, oh my God, what is happening? So, like, the movie was totally just normal pablum until then, and then it was like, boom, remember this, white people? And I was like, oh, God! So,
well, I think
there was none of that here.
No. Well, also, I haven't seen that movie, so I don't know, but I think whenever you watch a movie from a different time or a different place, there's obviously it's not gonna be modern, you're not gonna have modern sensibilities. That sounds even maybe egregious for the time, but I haven't seen it.
That was egregious for the time. Yeah, they really effed up in that one. But, however, the point I'm trying to make is that to contrast, this movie didn't have anything like that. There was maybe something subtle, a couple of digs here and there, but it really wasn't.
There was the director who made this also made a movie called was it not The Tournament? It's off. I can't remember the name of it right now for some reason, but Duel of Fist. That was it, Duel of Fist. And he made a sequel called The Angry Guest. And in The Angry Guest, the real bad guys are revealed to be these Japanese villains, and so he gets a little bit more into that territory there. But again, I think it's whenever you're watching this stuff from another place, you kind of have to go in expecting that you might see some things that rub up against your sensibilities. But
in this case, it didn't bother me, which was great. So I could actually just enjoy this awesome movie. It's really good. I feel like we're neglecting One-Armed Swordsman, though.
Yeah, well, One-Armed Swordsman's actually my favorite of the two. I figured I'd let you talk about your favorite. Well, I mean, One-Armed Swordsman, number one, it gets into the whole the character is he loses an arm, and a fundamental principle of any martial art is perseverance. And so I think that the thing that I find appealing about it is sort of just the willful overcoming of the disability that's handed to him, early on in the film. And in the source material that it's drawn from, the character actually loses his arm midway through the story, so it's even more of a thing in that version. But this one really captures the essence of it, I think. And so for me, that's the part that I really like about it. I also like that it's a really good love story, and it kind of gets all the stuff that that I like about the martial world, where you have this cycle of grudges and the cycle of violence, and the character is trying to remove himself from the martial world, but he kind of keeps getting pulled back in, and in this case we get a happy ending, which is sort of a you're not always guaranteed that in these movies. So it's just a nice film, and there's a sequel that's also really good, and there's also the new One-Armed Swordsman, which is excellent. And I think Jimmy Wang Yu even made like an unofficial One-Armed Swordsman. But yeah, I just really like this film, and I think that it's something that it's always tricky incorporating loss of limbs into games. But I think if you're doing a wuxia game, it should really be on the table. Like, the possibility of a character losing a limb at any time should be present. And so I always keep these kinds of films in my mind when I'm working on stuff. In fact, we had a character who lost his leg in the middle of a random encounter not too long ago. But yeah, so I don't know. What were your thoughts on the movie beyond that?
Oh man, well, I was surprised at like how well it cleaved to a 3-act structure. Like, I'm not used to that in wuxia movies. Wuxia movies generally have a much, like, I can't really fully wrap my head around the way they're pacing them. They always suss out really well. I'm always pleasantly surprised. But this one, I was like, this is a 3-act structure. Okay. Like, they set it up. He loses his arm. He goes through a period of mourning and gets some kung fu techniques. Then he makes a triumphant return and fights the bad guy. That's really like solid writing.
Well, I don't know for sure, because I'm not, like, this is not my area of expertise by any stretch. But what I've been told is that they might have something more like a 4-act structure. Might be the more common thing in a lot of Chinese movies and literature. Again, I don't know. I'm sure somebody could weigh in the comments or something. But
technically, the 3-act structure is a 5-act structure anyway, because it's got the introduction to the denouement.
What you learn to do if you watch a lot of wuxia or just a lot of movies from around the world is just kind of just go with it, And one of the pleasant things, I mean, it's interesting that the thing you like about this is that you discern the 3-act structure, because one of the things that I often like about the genre is that that I get away from a lot of those patterns.
The predictability makes a lot of movies less good in the West. Like, I was watching Guardians of the Galaxy again recently, and I was like, as I was watching it, and I like that movie, I was like, the only time I'm really enjoying this is whenever it's divorcing itself from that structure, because it's so familiar. Yep. It's everything is 3-act, which is one of the reasons, like, I agree with you there. It's one of the reasons I like to get away from that and watch wuxia movies, because it has a different pace. It's like listening to music in it with a different, what do you call that thing? Rhythm? Time signature?
Time signature in, like, music?
It's like that. It's like if everything's in 4/4 time, like, I like 4/4 time just fine, but, like, give me some Danny Elfman once in a while.
No, that's exactly it. You kind of need to break up the time signature on things, and you kind of need to try different. Not every song has to be a verse, chorus, verse, or whatever the whatever.
Yeah,
sort of,
bridge, all that.
Yeah. You like, for example, listen to like an old Roy Orbison song. There's like almost no structure to those things. He just kind of keeps crescendoing, and it's one of the cool things about them is it's almost like he didn't really know what the standard pattern was, so he just kind of did his own. But
that kind of creativity makes a wonderful variety.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know that I was delighted to see a 3-act structure. I just was able to recognize it, and I was like, that made it unusual for a wuxia film, which made it even more interesting for me.
Okay.
Like, that's what I'm commenting on. It's kind of unusual. There was speaking of really unusual creativity. You ever hear of Captain Beefheart?
No, I've never heard of that.
Look that up. It's an album from, I want to say, like the mid 70s. I think it was on Frank Zappa's label. It's extremely weird, but very creative. I was looking into the history of how they made that, and apparently, like, the guy whose idea it was to make that album loved music and knew nothing about it, so he got some musicians together and was like, okay, here's the sounds I want to make. Let's make this happen. And you combine really, like, high-minded masters of music with complete naive creativity, and it made Captain Beefheart. It was really good.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it was good. It was weird.
I haven't heard of that one. My dad used to listen to Frank Zappa, though, so maybe I'll check his record library, see if he's got something called Beefheart in there. All right, so the next thing we wanted to talk about was, just how these movies relate to gaming. And before the podcast, you had mentioned something about how both of them involved bad guys having tricks, and I think you also said there were like 3 things that you felt tied the movies together for purposes of this discussion.
I can't remember all 3 of them, though. We were talking about them. I know one of them was the bad guys are tricksy. Like, both of them, the bad guys, like, because at first I couldn't distinguish who the good guys or bad guys were, and then I realized that the bad guys in both cases were the ones who were using dirty, underhanded tricks. I'm like, okay, so that's how you determine who the bad guys are. The second thing is you have to have the right tool for the job. Both of them have this theme of, like, weapons having an exact counter, and if you get your weapon countered, you're toast. So that was the other thing. Those are the 2 ones I can remember. There was a third one, too. I don't remember what the other third thing was that I remember in both of these, but they had that in common as well.
Oh, you know what it was? Your whole clan is dead. That's what you told me.
Oh, that's right. Your whole clan is dead. That was the third thing, because in both cases, they start off with just a massacre. Like, one clan is just annihilating the other one. So, actually, I think both of them start off, like, both of them are really similar in that regard, where they start off with Clan 1 completely kicks the ass of Clan 2. Clan 2 decides to use evil tricks and counter their weapons. And then they massacre Clan 1. Your clan is dead. Act 3, we figured out your trick. You're dead. The end.
Well, that's sort of the fun thing, and you see this in a lot of these movies where some guy comes up with a really good technique or has a special weapon or a special way of using the weapon, and then the enemy or the main character figures out a response to it, and I think that's something that in wuxia is important to sort of allow for if you're gaming, which is. And I think it doesn't really matter what system you're using. I think this is where, whatever system you're using, a rulings over rules approach can be really handy if the rules aren't allowing you to do this. But if the players say, okay, we're going to try to do this in response to this bad guy's really super duper killer move, if it's a reasonable way to contain it, giving them, whether it's in the form of a bonus or saying, okay, you've invented this incredible new technique that'll take out the bad guy when he leaps into the air, because you've decided you're going to stab him in the belly because his belly is exposed as he's lifting his arms over his head or something. In this one, it was particularly clever because they designed a specific sort of locking device to use on their swords, and it was designed specifically for their sword and specifically for their style. And they also they kind of gloss over it a little bit because they can't show you all 64 moves, but they say like he has 64 moves or something, and they've invented 64 counters to each of the moves. And
they count them, darn it.
And so they're able to lock the sword and then stab them, and they basically use this to take out like a huge number of the guy's followers from the Golden Sword School. And the only reason it doesn't work on the hero is because his arm's been cut off and he has to fight with his other hand, and all of their devices, all of their tactics are intended to be used with the opposing hand, and he also has to use a shortened sword because he's fighting with his left hand. So he's like the one guy that can kind of get around their big trick. And I don't know, I think you can incorporate this kind of stuff into a game pretty easily. Whether it's at the mechanical level or just at the campaign and ruling level. But I don't know if this is something that you've given thought to or.
Oh yeah, big time. Because I remember, like, I'm the guy who's doing the successor to Legends of the Woolen, and in Legends of the Woolen, that was actually a mechanic. Mm-hmm. They used the Laughs and Fears mechanic, which was a little more broad. I think that what we're talking about, like the kind of like, I will lock your sword with the 64 golden-armed right-hand swordsman locking counterblade and then cut you with a knife, that's pretty specific.
Yeah.
Laughs was a little more general, and it was more like, if your style has the ability to overcome their style with ease, it laughs at it. And if their style is weak against your style, they fear you. And if you get both, you get a big swing advantage, which really mattered, actually. The problem was that these weren't really concrete rules terms, so they were very negotiable. And whereas in a classic game, like you said, you use a ruling as a GM, Legends of the Woolen doesn't really kind of carry on that legacy of rulings and rules. Yeah. It is a more like approach, kind of like Fate, where it's a lot more negotiable and everyone has a lot more like narrative power.
Okay.
So it led to a lot of arguments, unfortunately, and that's ultimately I had to toss the mechanic because I couldn't figure out how to do the 64 golden arm right hand swordsman blade locking thing in a way that was actually satisfying, because like you almost literally have to just write that exact thing down whenever you're designing a thing.
I think with something that specific, you either go that specific, like, okay, there's a technique in the game that does this, or if you're playing, like classic D&D or something much that has, more broad mechanics, the situation is so specific that you can kind of rule on it fairly easily, I find. So, like, if it almost doesn't matter what the system is. If a player says, hey, when he uses that golden sword, I'm going to use this specific device that I made, and because it's only going to work on that one guy, you can just say, yeah, sure, that's fine. That makes sense. Just keep in mind now that since you're doing that, they might be able to come out with a counter to your, you know what I mean? Like eventually.
But clearly that happened in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think earlier I was kind of saying that's basically rock, paper, scissors game design, where you have the perfect counter for them, so they have to make the perfect counter for you, and then you have this kind of cyclical thing.
Yeah.
And rock, paper, scissors is the ultimate form of that, because there's exactly 3. And that's exactly the smallest number that you need to make that concept work. You have super powerful gold sword technique, the sword locking blade, then guy who uses his left hand and the knife. Bam, 3.
No, and I think that's something that you can bake into a system. You could certainly like say, okay, I'm making this specific sword school, and again, it's going to vary tremendously depending on what game mechanics you're applying here and what system you're using. But if they have a set of, whether it's feats, whether it's, some kind of martial arts abilities in the game, whether it's some kind of class-related ability, you can build them with an eye towards, okay, but maybe there's this other school in the game or this other approach that's particularly good against this group, and trying to sort of build that in advance. That's something you can definitely do. It takes a lot of forethought.
does. Again though, you're basically going back to rock paper scissors there. Like the scissors school is going to have an advantage against the paper school, which in turn will have an advantage against the rock school. There's something like that as well in Lessons of the Woolen with the chi wheel, because they have the 5 elements, and in Taoist chi theory, every element has the element that it beats and the element that beats it, and then the one that it corresponds to, where they kind of get along. So if you're using a fire style and you're fighting a water guy, it's going to be hard for you. Yeah, you can make that into a system with varying degrees. Instead of making it an ultimate, this will beat the sword technique with the sword locking, it's a little more like you will have a bonus.
When I was a kid, I can't remember the name of this toy. It was like little figurines, and they were like all elemental based, and they were, I think it was, I don't remember if it was the 4 or the 5 elements, but it was like, fire beats water kind of a thing, and like and they had these decals on their chests so that it just looked black until you put your finger on them, and then it would reveal what their elemental source was. What was that?
Those little rub stickers that had the heat thing on them. Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, the Transformers used those at one point too, because they became a thing for a while.
They became a thing. Yeah. Much like that green goop stuff from the Turtles playsets became a thing for a little while. Like, you can get your hands on that stuff. It was cool.
Oh yeah, I remember we had that. There was they were putting that in all kinds of toys. I remember I had a He-Man. I think it was a He-Man toy where they had some kind of slime trap like that, using that green goop. But
it's a slime factory. Every toy uses it.
But that always kind of stuck with me, because I remember having a lot more fun with those figures than some of the other figures, because there was like a system. Do you know what I mean? There was a method for determining who won and who didn't. And so whereas if you were playing with virtually any other action figure, it was kind of who was able to sort of browbeat the other people into submission.
That's what they call the Cowboys and Indians problem. I shot you with an arrow. Nuh-uh, yeah. Yep. That's why we have mechanics, Brendan, because we're still playing Cowboys and Indians. We have dice now.
Yeah, no, that's why I don't usually use that analogy either, just because I think that, like, even in a very simple sort of rulings over rules game, you're not, it's you have an arbiter. You know what I mean? The referee.
Second you have an arbiter, second you have a GM, you're not playing Cowboys and Indians anymore. Then you actually have a real game.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I don't know. I think those are definitely things that you could sort of take from the movie. The way that techniques and tactics can be used to counter each other. And I know. Also, again, this is related to that, but this idea of inventive weaponry, I think, is really useful in a Wuxia campaign, where you see it here with the guy makes the hooking sword, or the hooking device, and you see it in 5 Elements Ninja with the vast array of cool little, and they're all based on ninja ideas, but you have all these different weapons that they're able to deploy. And that have different effects, and go ahead.
In the last scenes, oh my god, yeah, this movie is the gift that keeps on giving. I don't want to undersell, because that point you're making where they all have these weird weapons. The first time you encounter them, they kill everybody, but then later on, they do the same thing with the counter weapons and kill them all with the counter weapons.
And it's so elaborate. It's so just to give people an idea. The ninja they're all based on the elements, and the earth ninjas actually burrow under the ground, and they seem to be the most dangerous ones. They're the ones that are because they're spearing people in the groin from below the sand, and the solution is they turn these metal staffs into stilts, essentially, with spikes on the bottom.
Or stilts, yeah. They're great.
And so they're walking around on stilts, stabbing into the earth and killing the ninja that are under the ground. And that's not even the end of it. There's still more elaborate devices and all kinds of things. But
that's probably my favorite one is sword stilts. But guys, I've never really batted for a movie. Go see 5 Element Ninja. You owe it to yourselves, folks.
And also the thing about 5 Elements Ninja that's pretty notable is the amount of carnage. People are getting ripped apart in all kinds of ways. And it's a real but it's so surreal that it doesn't have it doesn't have the
it's more
impact
personal.
it's not gruesome. It's
you cut the guy in half, so it is kind of gruesome. But like even still.
But here's the thing: when he got ripped in half, I didn't feel like the guy was actually suffering when he was screaming. Do you know what I mean? Like some movies, that'll happen. I'll be like, oh, you know what I mean? I'll feel it.
Where it's about like making you feel the pain.
Yeah.
And this one it's more about the spectacle. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's more like blood spray is art. You know what I mean? It's more like a
the
who is it? Like a
spray.
Pollock painting. You know what I mean? It's more like that kind of thing. But yeah. So I guess what I would say to this though is and this is really more about GMing, I think, than system. Though you can certainly create it in the system too, but when the players come up with an idea like, hey, I want to make this special device and I want it to do X, kind of, considering it and rolling, you don't necessarily have to go with it if it's a bad idea, but if it makes sense, if it's kind of an interesting solution to the problem, I would say, if they go to a blacksmith and ask to have something made, it's perfectly in keeping with the genre. Especially, in other movies like Flying Guillotine, things like that, you see it. But being able to sort of invent a weapon that maybe operates outside of whatever system you're working within is something that you want to be open to. And then just being aware that once that's unleashed, But here's the thing, and this is sort of when I talked about the evolving landscape of the martial world. That's what I meant. It's sort of like the GM should always kind of if you allow these things to be introduced, that's fine. Just be aware that somebody down the road might also introduce something because, some guy just came up with a super deadly hooking device that is stopping all the swordsmen in the land. So naturally, people are going to now start trying to take that guy out with new devices.
An important thing to remember about Wuxia Cinema too, and that you see that in these movies very, very strongly, is a lot of the arc of them is the bad guy has a technique we can't beat. So we invent that way to beat him, or we discover it, then we beat him with it. Like that's like the narrative arc of a lot of wuxia.
Yep.
So if you're going to make a wuxia game, you better be ready to bring that in.
Yeah. Though there is one thing I will say here. I think one thing we don't want to lose sight of is the game element. It's still a game, and I think you can get stuck on this idea of, well, it's got to have everything exactly like it does from the source material, But games are unpredictable, so I think it's always important to allow for things to meander. For example, for things to not necessarily culminate the way that they might in a Wuxia story.
Point. Because like a game does not exist in a 3-act structure. A movie does.
Yeah.
A book does. But like a game, they're going to pick up and have their next 3 acts next week. It's more like a TV series. Yeah. And in a TV series, you can jump the shark. You jump the shark with something in a game you introduce, that's what the game's about. Yeah. I let my players get 3 freaking dragons in the last campaign I ran. Guess what that campaign became about?
Taking over the world with dragons?
Yeah, they blew up the whole world with dragons, which is exactly what you'd expect, right? But I'd never done it before, so I'm like, you know what? Let's see. Let's stress test this. They had a good time. I learned a valuable lesson. So I mean, I don't regret it. But if you introduce something that makes the previous stuff irrelevant, then whatever the new thing is you introduce, that's what the game is about. That's why that kind of specific, I will lock these techniques from this school, I'm basically okay with. Because otherwise, those were swords.
Yeah.
They don't do anything special if some guy has a hook sword or a staff.
Exactly. And in fact, in this movie, it's really specifically about that sword and that sword style. So somebody that came in with a different kind of sword, they might not be effective against. It's sort of open to interpretation. So I think when it's something that specific, it's it's fine.
Yeah, I'm not.
But
not too worried about it.
But also,
so yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
That keeps you from jumping the shark if you rein it in like, okay, so we've made the 18 elements poison. It's not better than all poisons, but it does this one thing better than every other poison. It's very slow and hard to detect.
Yeah.
There. Okay. That's something and that can be important and a big plot point and something that matters a lot to the players and they can incorporate in future games that won't kill your campaign.
Yeah. No, I think...
don't jump the shark. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
I'm
it's
interrupting.
okay. But yeah, I think with the ninja stuff too, that can be really fun. Like I remember I brought ninjas into my campaign at one point, and I just completely pulled from Five Elements Ninja. I had the guys that were like under the ground, just like the Earth Element ninjas, and they were using like plumes of red smoke in their face, and all kinds of little tricks.
They were cool.
And I think it's the same theme that we're talking about. It's just with ninja, it's like even more tricky. It's like it's like the cool thing about ninja is they don't necessarily have to be great fighters. They can be less powerful even than the heroes, but their tactics and their tricks are so good that they're infuriating to deal with it until you sort of figure out how to work around all their weaponry or their tactics, and they do surprising things. I think at some point we'll try to watch the movie. I think it's called Duel to the Death, and it's not a Shaw Brothers film, but it was made around around 1983, so close to Five Elements Ninja, and it's got ninja in it. But one of the ways that they poison or they try to poison one of the characters is they drop a thread from the ceiling. There's a ninja on the roof, and he drops a thread down, and it lingers, I think, over somebody's cup of tea or over their soup, and then they just start dripping poison down the thread. And that was something I pulled into one of my games too, because I thought that's a really cool way to kill somebody.
And the ninja really exemplify that. And like again, that we should tie that into the bad guys have tricks. Like that's something that technically doesn't exist within the mechanics of a system. Like you can just describe as a GM, you see a tiny thread hovering over this guy's tea, but like there's no mechanic for thread. We're not gonna get that myopic when we're designing games. So that's one of those things where like when it comes to tricksy bad guys, I think you are within your realm as a GM and as a player to do something that doesn't exist on the sheet. That gives them that lets you interact with that kind of tactical infinity of the sort of shared imagined space of the game. I pour poison on a thread and it goes down into the guy's teeth.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, when I first started playing these games, the first thing that struck me about them was that, I was sort of in this world and I could say, okay, I'm going to try to do this. And the GM sort of honestly would consider what it was I was trying to do. And I think I like both games that are light mechanically and games that are complex mechanically. I tend to fluctuate and either go through phases where I'm playing more mechanically heavy games, or where I sort of I get tired of that and then I go back to lighter games. But regardless of whether I'm playing, I think that's natural. But regardless of which ones I'm playing, I really like there to be an openness of the mechanics don't have to define everything. Do you know what I mean? Like if and what's plausible and sounds the most logical should always be able to kind of trump. If you've hit a what would you call it? If you've hit an edge case where where the mechanics are sort of preventing something that would happen from happening, then you should be able to bust open that edge case in my view. And I think
absolutely, because designers can't anticipate everything. You make rules that cover general situations, and then if it's like, oh wait, that means you can't open doors. That's weird, huh?
Yeah.
Of course you can open doors. Just ignore that part.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the role of the GM is to facilitate the mechanics. Say, okay, obviously this was not the intent here. I'm going to allow you to do X, or I'm going to say this can happen, or that, and I feel like that was such an assumption when I was growing up playing, and it's become less of a widespread assumption, it seems, these days. I think maybe because of I don't know. I don't want to speculate as to why, because it's
I'm
so
not sure
hard.
Why. But the truth is, it is a persistent thing that I've encountered a lot on forums and things like that, even talking to people, where they seem to believe the whole game, much like a board game, is contained in the rules. And not for a role-playing game. You can't. If you're making rules for rope that aren't just a set of guidelines for GMs or something, then you're getting to the point where you can't play the game you're designing anymore. You're not making a physics simulator, guys.
No, and I think I don't know. I think again every I mean, I know that there probably are people who do like games that are sort of more played raw, and I can understand where they're coming from, but I I've just never enjoyed, like, that's always been something that kind of stifles my enjoyment of the game. And I'll generally adhere to the rules, but I like there to be that openness of, look, in this case, it just doesn't apply.
And there's a difference between doing something that's not spelled out in the rules and breaking the rules. Because the thread thing doesn't violate a rule, it's just not spelled out in the rules. So you've got to have to kind of use your idea of what would happen in that scenario to make it happen as a GM. Or as a player, you need to talk to the GM about, like, hey, this is the idea that I have. My ninja's going to pour the string down, pour some poison on it. Would that work? And, like, there's a technique that gets bandied about on the RPG side a lot called Free Kriegspiel, which is basically that, plus the GM just kind of thinks to himself, like, what's the likelihood of that happening? Okay, roll 7 or higher on 2d6. There we go. And that's Free Kriegspiel, is there's no rules. It's just you propose what you want to do. If it's unlikely, or if there's a chance of failure, the GM will give you a number, roll it, move on.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. I mean, it depends. I usually my solution is I either try to figure out what ability does this system have that the character has that I could use, and if not, you can assign a probability of some kind. I think having some flexibility there. I think the important thing is that and I guess we're maybe getting a little bit away from Wuxia here, but the important thing is that that the GM sort of, again, this is why having a human referee is important, I think, because that's, to me, that's always what kind of creates that sense of life to the setting. And so, if the GM, if there isn't something covered in the rules, or the rules aren't covering it well, and the GM can step in and say, okay, you know what, in this case, I think it's like it's a foregone conclusion, so you can just do it. That's fine. Or if the GM says, I think there's like an 80% chance, that's fine.
And this is one of the reasons I like your game so much. By the way, getting back to Wandering Heroes, is that it's one of those games where it really takes that as its core assumption, that a human being can do what a human being can do, but in addition to that, here's some rules for kung fu action. Mm-hmm. That's a healthy place, I think, to design a game, because it means you can always, as the GM, rein it back to, well, okay, but we're in the physical universe here, therefore you can open doors.
Yeah.
I love that, and it makes the ability to pull in a free Kriegspiel, like just roll a 7+, or something like that, like doing a simple percentage or whatever, it makes that much more reasonable. Games that have a lot more interlocking mechanics tend to have a cascade failure when you do that to them. Exalted is, again, a good example of this. I don't know if you ever played Exalted, but Exalted was a game where if you as the GM dared to alter something, it would change the underlying assumptions for so many things that were linked to that, and it screwed the game over. So having more flexibility is definitely an advantage there. If you lock yourself into a bunch of cascaded, linked mechanics, ugh.
Well, also, just as an example, like, with the kung fu techniques, like, one of the ways that I use them when I'm actually running the game is if a player wants to do something, I'll let them use techniques in ways that maybe they weren't intended for. Do you know what I mean? If, like, somebody has, like, a counter that allows you to slide away from an attack, and the player says, hey, I want to run away from this combat. Can I use that counter to do that? I'm totally fine with that. That makes total sense to me.
Because again, there's another brilliant thing that you did that I aped in my design with the effect chart, was because you cleanly describe what the technique does in terms of, okay, you slide away from them, like, you can, as a GM, make a ruling that makes that technique still have that same kind of general level of power, but rewards their unique use of it. Okay, they're not going to expect you to do that. So not only do you get a little boost in your movement, but they don't get to respond this round because it really surprised them. You just slide right out of there. Again, that's a great ruling. It doesn't break the power scale of that technique. And because that technique discreetly works within the game, it doesn't annihilate anything. It allows them to be creative and get an advantage. I love that. Love it, Brendan.
Well,
such a designer.
No. I think you should play in some of my games before you drop to that conclusion, because I assure you that I make plenty of bad calls.
Even if you as a GM make bad calls, you designed a really rockin' ass game that allows you to make great calls. So I have faith in you. Like, I'd love to play these games. We're gonna have to set that up. Anyway, moving on back to.
So you wanted to talk about hex crawls. That was something else you wanted to talk about. And I was trying to sort of find a way to make that fit with the movies. And for me, the thing that connects all these Shaw Brothers films, but particularly these two, with the idea of hex crawls, is how whenever I watch a Shaw Brothers movie, I feel like I'm in they create a world that I feel like I'm in, and I sort of make a mental map of how all the set pieces connect to each other. Do you know what I mean? So like,
you're like, that's in a hex map.
Well, no, not like that. But I mean, like you fill in the blanks. Like you see the character at the sword school, and again, it's because of the sets. The Shaw Brothers movies have these beautiful sets that are they're just real enough, but just fake enough that that you can imagine them as maps in your head very easily. I guess is how I would describe it.
There is a map in 5-Element Ninjas. Like the lady ninja, Shinzi, she straight up maps their whole complex.
That's true. No, that's true.
So yeah, maps are important.
And
architects is important. I agree.
But I don't know. So I always sort of imagine my Wuxia campaigns as like Shaw Brothers sets. Like, okay, here's where the tea house is, and here's where that like forest that you wandered through is, and and you can kind of, you can sort of create like a nice little small, just to start, like a small little hex crawl sandbox of some kind, drawing off the inspiration of Shaw Brothers movies. The first like conscious attempt I made at doing that when I was working on Ogre Gate, or even before that, I guess, because I hadn't really. I ran a what was it? I ran an old D&D campaign where I took Lady Hermit and I took Come Drink With Me, and I took like the basic elements of those movies and kind of made a small little sandbox out of it, where I had like a temple that was overrun by bandits, and I had like a Black Claw Devil type gang, and all these things that were in those movies, and then I just expanded on them, and I think that I don't know, it just I think it works as an inspiration for hex crawl material. But I don't know, maybe you had something more specific in mind that you wanted to dive into with that.
I completely agree, 100%. No argument with everything you just said. I did want to talk about hex crawls in terms of delivering content, 'cause I think that you're talking about like, here's how you can get some inspiration for content. Look at a Shaw Brothers movie. Is there a cool set? Is there a faction in it? Bam. You can take that and put that somewhere. Mm-hmm. And what a hex crawl really is just having like little chunks of content and a way to access them through role-playing with the game. Mm-hmm. The Alexandrian goes into a lot about that. Like when they're hex crawl thing, they're like, you want players to have an action that they are describing to you in terms of their character's action that accesses content that you've prepared, they can then engage with it as a game. Alex, can you please stop that, buddy? Not right now. Give me a minute.
So,
Alex.
Oh, that's okay. So I'm sorry. So the Alexandrian. What's the name of the series of articles or posts?
That's probably running the hex crawl. Okay. I blend a lot together in my head with them because I constantly go back to the well with the Alexandrian. I love that guy. And he does that in the urban crawl too. When he's thinking about urban crawls, is that series of articles where he's like, you don't want players to say, I want content from this content tree. What you want them to do is go and say, I'm going to go to my tea house and hit up my contact to see what the underworld is doing. Okay. And that gets them content from the underworld tree. Okay. So the places he puts content are in hexes where I'm exploring, the West Iron Sword Mountains. Oh, okay. You find the bandit cave there. Mm-hmm. You describe what you're doing in character, that grabs the content and puts you in a place. You just grab your little bandit camp and the bad guys in it, and you start running it like a dungeon crawl.
Okay. I think I have a much more shoot from the hip kind of approach with hex crawls. I think we've talked about this before.
Oh yeah, he's really like elaborate with them.
Yeah. In his the Alexandrian, I use his he has a lot of good stuff in there on investigations and mysteries and that kind of thing. And he also, he's written a lot of posts have gone have gone on to have impacts on conversations on forums and stuff. So it's one of these places that I always kind of go back to and check out. But my approach to hex crawls, I guess, is I just sort of, I don't know, I've just kind of always done it the same way, where I get the hex pad and I draw out everything that I have on the map, and then I kind of flesh those locations and NPCs and groups out, and that's kind of how I've always done it. And again, a location on that map might lead to another map of some kind. But it's interesting. One of the things that we do a RPG game lab on like about once every month, and Rob Conley is on there, and Rob has this saying. I can't remember exactly what the phrase is, but he basically says, eventually all that's left is NPCs. Like, no matter how much you lay down on your map, eventually it all gets explored if the campaign is long lasting enough, and all that's left there are the NPCs and whatever the NPCs have built and the PCs have built and whatever world has sort of emerged around all of these geographic features. So I tend to lean very heavily on NPCs. Is something that I've even in a hex crawl, even if the players are moving around on the hex on the hex map, so are the NPCs. Do you know what I mean? There are still active groups and organizations that might be working against them or working for them, and so I like to one of the, again, I probably mentioned this to you before as well, but one of the most impactful modules that I ran when I first started GMing was Feast of Goblins, the Ravenloft adventure, and that was in the tradition of Castle Ravenloft, which was a living adventure where the main bad guy was assumed to move around and sort of be a free agent, just like the PCs are, and that really opened up gaming to me in a way that I hadn't been open before. Where before everything was much more static, but when you layer that on top of a dungeon or a hex crawl, you really get a much more rich experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Like, you don't want the world to be static. Like, even within the dungeon, Justin Alexander goes into like repopulating the mega dungeon, where like, okay, the PCs went, cleared out a few levels of this dungeon, then left. All right, what happened in the meantime? Did some more monsters show up? Did that change the balance of power of the factions? You can do that exact same thing in a city. Say you go into the city, there's an evil martial brotherhood, you whoop their butts. Then who replaces them? Is it the players, or they leave and have someone else come in, fill the gap? Power vacuums and things like that, wonderful. And it makes it so that you can take the same content, which is city and factions and things that you've already prepared, and just kind of remix it between sessions and consistently get something new going on. And I rail against having a plot in your head as a GM, but I absolutely think that NPCs should have plots and plans. So, like, because that becomes the session then. Oh, do we help Condor King, or are we going to stand against the 3 Vampire Lord? Great stuff. And it's not a lot of work either, because you just it's not a lot of work either. It's basically the same amount of work put into a normal campaign, except you're just between sessions. You're like, okay, so what are these? How are these factions reacting to things? How are these major players changing?
No, and it's one of those things too where you don't have to. You can sort of vary how much intensity you apply to that. Like, some weeks you might not pay so much attention because the players are really active with other things, and you just don't want to. You as a GM, you can't tend to everything 100% of the time.
No, you have time.
But you occasionally want to revisit it. One of the ways that I do it easily is I just have the grudge table. So when I roll on a grudge, this so and so is back in play. That's just an easy way for me to kind of consistently bring people back into the player's world that that who they've crossed paths with, and I think you could expand on something like that to include all of these living elements. Just like just a way of if you ideally you're doing it without a table. Ideally you're saying, oh, this is naturally when this guy is kind of going to try to seize the opportunity to take advantage of the players. But if you have so much stuff that you don't want to bother to keep track of that, or you need to occasionally remind yourself of things you've forgotten about, tables can be really handy for it.
Something like just taking the major NPCs of your game, putting them all on a table, and then just, at that point, if you didn't even want to track it at all, and you still wanted to have a living campaign, like you said, you could just roll on that table every couple sessions. Looks like the Garlic Master has a grudge against the players now.
Yeah.
Let's see how that plays out. That's great. Again, very little work for a really rich game experience.
And you see that at work in both of these movies where, characters come back. In the case of One Armed Swordsman, it's years later to settle a grudge. And in the Five Element Ninja, it's the main character who's settling the grudge. So it's coming at it from the slightly different angle. But again, if you just imagine the players of the ninjas or something, then it's a similar type of thing. But yeah, so I don't know, anything else you wanted to discuss about these movies?
About these movies in particular, couple of really brief notes. The last battle with the Lord of the Ninja in Five Element Ninja is amazing. It's really good. It was actually reminding me a lot about, and it made me realize actually as I was watching it, I was like, wait a minute. This is almost beat for beat the battle with Shredder at the end of the Ninja Turtles movie from my childhood, and I was like, "Oh my god, that's what they were watching. They were watching these movies, and that's what inspired the Turtles. I finally understand now." And I was like, "Okay." And Shredder and that guy have a lot in common. Master of a Ninja Clan.
I have not seen that movie in a long time, so I'm going to assume you're correct there. But this is an important point because you watch a lot of these movies and you will see that a lot. You'll see, number one, you'll see things that they've borrowed from movies that maybe came from the West, but you'll also see 10 years later I remember seeing exactly that scene in this action movie or something. You especially see it with like the Hong Kong action movies in like the 80s and stuff, where when I first saw Commando, I had no idea that they got like half their ideas from Police Story or something. It's like there's like a whole scene in the mall that I'm pretty sure was ripped right out of Police Story, for example. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
Well, the thing to keep in mind about wuxia movies is that they don't have a huge budget, and so like they have their competition, such as it is, because they're all competing for your dollars to go to the movie theater to see them. Their competition, the way they distinguish themselves is, hey, we have to have really unusual, unique ideas and fight scenes and things like that to draw people in. And you start seeing that happen in American cinema right around The Matrix and times like that, where you start seeing like those kind of spectacle moments that you've never seen before in a movie happen. And that becomes the draw of the movie. So that originated in wuxia movies, as far as I can tell, because like each wuxia movie I've seen, that's how they're like. If I was looking at it like a producer, I'd be like, okay, what have we got that no other movie in China has? And they're like, color-coded ninjas. And I was like, go.
Well, I think you see an evolution. You see, you definitely, see, well, okay, this movie did this, and now this movie is trying to top that movie, or, you certainly can see
our martial brotherhood competing against one another. It's brilliant.
But also, I think because fighting is such a, I guess the closest thing that I can think of in like American movies would be like maybe swashbuckling type films. Movies like that. Or sword and sandal type movies.
It's a direct line. Yeah.
Where you can't, you have to change things up because it just gets boring if it's the same, just like over and over again. And so it just naturally will, I think, escalate on a visual medium like that. And and where I think it gets interesting,
game design.
but they also do some interesting things where they bring in a lot of sort of like the Peking opera tradition and things like that to it. So the movie we saw, Five Element Ninja, that's not technically a Venom movie, but it's like what a Venom movie is like. And the Venom mob, they have like a real sort of Peking opera style background with like you have these acrobatics, and I'm sure you were picking up on that in Five Element Ninja, where there's a lot of leaping around and a lot of just like amazing really physical displays. I'm sorry?
There's one scene. It's one of the ninja elements where the main character leaps, and like it leaps, then it cuts, and he's leaping, and it's a different angle from the same leap, and it's amazing. It's really mind blowing wire work. So like, yeah, I definitely noticed it.
Yeah, we should actually do some proper Venom movies at some point, because those you really see like the acrobatics, and I think that's where you get the physical perfection that there's sort of like there's like a martial arts quality to a lot of stunt work, where it brings a lot of the, like, if you do martial arts, you have to keep doing that punch or that kick until you get it right. You do, somebody who's been doing it for years, they're still perfecting that kick after decades. And I think that dedication and craftsmanship is evident in a lot of the stunt work in these movies, especially as you get into as things move on into the 80s, where you start to really see this I don't know, it's sort of like this culmination of all the stuff that came before. And,
I think you still see that in Jackie Chan movies and things like that. You still see guys that can do things physically that must have taken them decades to have gotten to the point. But he came
out of that. I mean, he was making movies in the 70s, and so like and a lot of the like notable Jackie Chan movies are like 80s films, and that's kind of what when I say Hong Kong action movie, one of the Jackie Chan films are one of the things that leap to mind, and definitely I would put him in that category of just having that dedication. I mean, just look at the outtakes alone in some of his movies, and but
that reminds me, going back to that fight scene, by the way, in choreography. Okay, so there's a scene in that last scene, main character and Ninja King are fighting, and he stabs down, and the guy moves his body between the clearly sharp prop blades they were using and that guy, and then leaps up like an arrow and backflips over him in one unedited cut. And I was just like, they just did that. Oh my god. So yeah, the stunt work in the movie is really fantastic. I think I might have like glossed over it with how much other awesome stuff is happening. These guys are really fantastic physically. You are correct. It's breathtaking to see some of the stuff they do.
No, I definitely agree with that, and I think that's the note we're gonna have to end on, because I unfortunately am out of time here. So we'll end it there, and we'll be back on next time with some more movies, and I think we're gonna do Fist of the North Star is gonna be something we talk about. I grabbed a copy of it, and this Friday we're doing a movie called Wu Yen on Wuxia Weekend, which I would encourage people to listen in on, and so until next time, we will talk to you later.